I'm pleased to chair this keynote that will be addressed by Professor Francisco Ortega from the University of Granada, Spain. It's our pleasure to have you here in our days. Dr. Ortega is currently a visiting professor at our faculty, and his research topics relate to exercise, physical activity, fitness, obesity, and brain. So today he will talk about effects of exercise on physical and mental brain health in humans. And we have reserved about 45 to 50 minutes for the actual presentation, and then questions for 10-15 minutes afterwards. So please welcome Professor Ortega.
Thank you very much. Hei, moi, more, terve. That's all I know about Finnish. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really my pleasure to give this lecture today here. And I was told also to give a very short introduction in addition to what she said. So my background is in sports science. I studied sports science in the Faculty of Sports Science in Granada University. And then I did my PhD in exercise physiology in the Faculty of Medicine, also in Granada. And a second PhD and a postdoc period, altogether about 5 years at Karolinska Institute in Sweden. Also about exercise and physical activity exercise and health outcomes. So that's basically what I've been doing over the years. And for about 13 years ago, I'm back in the University of Granada as a professor at the Faculty of Sports Science, and now happily also having the opportunity to be a visiting professor at this university, where it's giving a lot of opportunity to collaborate with excellent researchers, some of them in this room today. And I'm really happy to talk about this broad topic today. It is really a challenge because if we think on health, it's multidimensional. Here we just say physical and mental brain health, but of course it has many little pieces inside that and in many age or population groups. So it's kind of difficult. So I try to go from broader to some more specific themes from the beginning to the end of my presentation. And I put here the time to try to adjust properly. So this is kind of the agenda for today. I'll try to start a bit more from an evolutionary point of view about the origins of why physical activity is connected with health, or the opposite, why inactivity is connected to disease. I'll try to summarize the evidence on physical activity and health. And here, when I talk about physical activity, I'm including also all manifestation or dimensions of physical activity, including exercise, a structured, intentional, purposeful part of the physical activity. All that is included, because the evidence coming from that come from RCT, randomized control trial, prospective cohort studies, and some are on physical activity, some are on exercise. So when I talk about physical activity, we are referring to the same broad concept that include also exercise. Then I want to put the focus, assuming a little bit in obesity, childhood obesity, because it's very prevalent in the world, and also in the developing countries and Europe, and how exercise also can help in that, and kind of finishing up with some public health messages. So that's the goal. So if we look at this picture, maybe some of you have heard or the stories about some population that is still nowadays, they call it modern hunter-gatherer community. There are very few left in the world. This is the Hadza that is in Tanzania in Africa, is one of the few left, and they expected or is thought to be about 1,300 people, so it's really a small community, and there are a few other in Mexico and other places, but it's less and less. But there is a focus of study for evolutionary biology to try to understand how we have been for hundreds of thousands of years. So if we think of these people, how they live, they actually need to get food. That's essential for survival and for reproduction, so that the species can survive over the years. So they need to move to get the food. They need to move. Activity is a necessity. It is there. It is obvious. And it's believed that from the beginning of human beings, let's say Homo sapiens, it was already like that. And even ancestors of human sapiens, like let's say about 2 million years ago, it was already like that. So imagine that we've been millions of years living on a lifestyle, on a way of living that include by necessity physical activity. If we come a little bit closer to today, but still really far, 12,000 years ago, it's believed that they started agriculture and farming in some society, and that makes a big difference. It might reduce already the activity level needed to obtain the food, but still, clearly, it implies hard work, physical work, and a lot of physical activity to get running the agriculture and farming. So again, population were active for necessity. Some of these articles, National Geographic has a lot of these really nice documented articles on this evolution. So basically, our generation, our physiology, our biology, it has been shaped up in a way to respond or to be adapted to activity, an active life. And of course, there is also a paradox because of food or energy, it was limited, it was always hard to find, so you don't want to waste your energy. So you basically, on one way, we've been designed to be active, but on the other way, we've been designed to save energy as much as possible because we don't know when we will find food again. So basically, you are not running around in those populations just wasting your energy just because of that. You do waste energy or invest energy in getting food or with some exception, for fun. Some dancing, some activities that it has been registered in this population over the years, but no other reason. So basically, we are energy savers, and that explains a lot of things of what happened today. So let's think of post-industrial era. Machines start to help us with the work we used to do before, more and more and more over the last hundreds of years, and then we don't need to be active anymore. We don't need to be active. And why should we be active if we are energy savers, if we should save energy from an evolutionary point of view? So as a consequence, we have a highly inactive society in different parts around the world, except for this few community. And of course, there is a lot of data, and any data on physical activity, it has always had to be taken carefully. Any data on prevalences, because it's very difficult to measure the whole physical activity behavior. And this, for instance, data on WHO and some of big gathering of data on 1.6 million people about the self-report physical activity levels. It tells us that across the globe, boys and girls, adolescents, they are highly inactive. The proportion is about 80% of the population is inactive, according to these methods. And it hasn't changed over the last 15 years much, at least not in the right direction. But all this data is based on self-report. And it's not easy, actually, to self-report everything you do. You might miss a lot of activities that you have done. So it could be that it's bias, and there is an error there, for sure. So one initiative that was done is try to help with some objective data. So we now have the possibility, the devices, accelerometers, movement sensors, that can tell us objectively how much the people move. But even with that methodology, we still have limitations. But of course, at least it's some extra data, and this is an initiative led by Ulf Ekelund Group and some other, where we could participate as well, providing data from Europe. And basically about these 50,000 people using the same models, harmonized methods to process the accelerometer signals, came with the conclusion that about 70% of the children and adolescents in Europe are inactive. So not too far from the 80% that was provided by the questionnaires. So it might still be huge differences. So, but what we see in our daily lives, many people actually don't have the need to do any movements almost around the whole day. We wake up, we have breakfast, eating, we could go to work or school in a passive way. We can be in the school quite inactive. We can go back home and have a snack and then watch something and play music and read books or do homework or whatever and go to bed and have dinner. So nowadays it's not needed to be active. So this is a challenge we have. Probably many of you know this guy, is Daniel Lieberman. He was a keynote lecturer in the Poor Symposium that maybe some of you were present. And I was reading this summer this book, actually, and it was really nice. It took me a long time to read it because it has a lot of references in the back And as a scientist, I was interested to check every reference that was backing up his statements. Clearly, that's not for nothing that he is a professor in Harvard. He has published more than 18 articles in Nature and Science. So it's really nice, actually, to read a book that says, in simple words, a lot of science-based information. And basically, he said not only we have, over the years, evolved to be active, but also even runners, especially endurance runners. If we compare humans with most of species, most of animals that we might know, they might be faster than us in a short time. But in the endurance time, human has several characteristics, anthropometric, and also sweating system, refrigerating system that is more advanced than most species. So that, for instance, humans, might be this race, humans against horses, and humans are outperforming horses in a long distance run. So actually, we are designed for be active and also even endurance runners. So what is the problem then? The problem is the mismatch, because over physiology, over biology has developed over the years to be and where we actually are. A society where there is no need to be active for necessity. So the only chance is to be active for fun. And that, I will leave a lot of this discussion for the end of the session when we have this time for questions, because there is a big challenge is how can we get the people more active, actually? And that's a very difficult one. So that's why physical activity is linked with health, with disease. And, but this was kind of theoretical background, evolutionary background. Let's see what is the current evidence, how much we know, data proven about the links between physical activity and different health outcomes. And when I try to summarize this evidence, it's so broad. I say, how can I do it? It's so many health outcomes. It's so many target groups in the population. There is a lot of individual study, a lot of meta-analysis for each of these single units of information. So I thought that actually probably one of the best systematic review process is what has been done for guidelines. This is what is called a macro umbrella review. So it's a review of systematic reviews of meta-analysis that cover many different health outcomes, that include prospective and intervention studies, that include many different groups of the population. So all of these end up with thousands of meta-analysis to be analyzed. And with a lot of people need to work for almost 2 years to get some of these guidelines. So I had the opportunity to participate in this process over a couple of years, and the publication came in the end almost 3 years ago, in 2020. And this picture is some of the people, 25 research were commissioned, and also some specific librarian and experts in grading evidence methods were assisting and guiding the homogeneity and the standardization of the methods across the different groups. So the guidelines have two goals from my point of view. And there is not only the WHO guidelines, as you might well know, but there is also American guidelines have been very influential. They have come over the years, and the latest version was in 2018. But also Canada did guidelines, own national guidelines, Australia, UK, the Netherlands, and some other countries. So why was needed more guidelines? We already have a lot of guidelines. So I didn't know actually at the beginning, but through the process I began to understand better. And I think one reason is that WHO really care about the most vulnerable people. So I actually think on those countries that don't have the resources to do their own guidelines, but they also we need to reach there. So we think, for instance, on diseases like HIV, it's not prevalent in developed countries, but it is still prevalent in a lot of people living with that in Africa. So that was not an outcome included, for instance, or a population included in any of the other Western guidelines. So there were reasons to study parts that can be interested in other parts of the world. And also, of course, these guidelines and this communication to try to make an effort to reach more corners around the world. So that was one of the reasons, to be more global and to be more inclusive, including groups like people with living with disabilities, or people living with certain chronic conditions that might not be so prevalent in Western world. So that's one reason. But another reason is a pragmatic reason. The evidence is out there. The scientific papers are published in journals, and the journals are gathering data sets that we can access them. So the evidence is out there, and it's the same evidence whoever does the search, if you do it correctly, right? So does it make sense that every country is investing a lot of money and people and resources to review the same evidence to come with similar evidence conclusions? Probably not. It's a waste of resources. So I think that's another reason why it's actually good to kind of have a global international organization instead of do everybody the same work at its own country. Better, let's put the money and the effort into communicating this guideline, into implementation, into really try to make the people more active instead of review and do the same process everybody. So I think that was one of the good things of these guidelines, that it gathered in the same room people who has participated in the American guidelines, Australian, Canadian, the Dutch guidelines. All these people were in the same room and putting together the experience and try to broaden it to cover the whole world. So, and the reason why I brought this here is because in addition to tell us how much physical activities people at different subgroups of the population should do, is a big body of evidence on physical activity and which health outcomes there is evidence that can be improved if we achieve certain amounts of physical activity. And that was my idea, to find a body of information that can summarize the broad physical and mental and brain health outcomes in different age groups. So the methods that were followed in this, for these WHO guidelines, first was a discussion of the key questions. Before to run any search, you need to know what are your PICO, your questions, and what are the health outcomes and the population groups that you want to focus. Then it was a review or reviews. You don't review individual study, but systematic reviews and meta-analysis only. So it needs to be a big body of evidence to be translated into these guidelines. And, and then you evaluate the quality of these systematic reviews using the Amstar scale, so that the guidelines are rated in different levels, and those with less quality are excluded for the informing the guidelines later on. And the grade is probably the most prestigious and accurate way of grading the evidence, and is used in all the WHO guidelines, but also in most of the major organizations in the world. So that was used. That, for instance, was not used in the American guidelines or most of the previous national guidelines. And then also from evidence to recommendation, it is a protocol how to do this process, also based on grade methodology. So basically this was what was done over a couple of years to come with the 2020 guidelines. So what are the questions? We focus on physical activity and sedentary as lifestyle behaviors. So it was separate searches for physical activity with health outcomes and separate searches for sedentary behavior with health outcomes. And mainly it was look at whether there is an association with a set of outcomes that was also decided, whether the association is dose response, the more you do, the better, and whether there is any variation depending on the type of physical activity. So these three questions for both physical activity and sedentary behavior were answered. And this table, I don't expect you to see, but it's in the main article of the guidelines. It just reflects the complexity of doing one of these macro review, because here we have the health outcomes, and here we have the target groups. So basically, you need to do a lot of working groups to review the associations of physical activity and sedentary behavior separately, with adiposity, weight gain, weight control, weight reduction, adverse events, all cause and specific cause mortality, bone health, cardiometabolic health, cognitive outcome, disease progression, falls in all the population, fetal outcomes, functional ability, gestational issues during pregnancy, and so on and so on. So basically, it's a lot of health outcomes. Each of them has a set of keywords and related with physical activity and dose response, type of. So basically, it's a lot of information to be reviewed and to try to summarize it. You will laugh in the end when I show you how all this work was summarized in so few words. But the evidence is there. It is published also in a separate files. So this is an example of the ARMS, the quality assessment of each systematic review, the ARMStar 2. So basically, it's a number of items, and for each line is a different systematic review or meta-analysis, and it's assessed for different items. In the end, you say that the quality is low, moderate, or critically low or high. So those critically low were excluded directly for informing the guidelines, and the other were considering weighting the level of evidence. And then we applied the grading methods and came with the guidelines. But the guideline book comes with an annex. And this annex is about 500 pages of evidence. So there is where you can find all the profile, all the systematic review. And this was actually done in coordination with the previous efforts or reviews done in American guidelines and the Australian and the Canada. So kind of put together what has been done, extend the search, update the search, and interpreted all the evidence existing until the moment. That was basically the work done. How the guidelines were published in many different formats. There were some people in the guidelines group. Manos Stamatakis was part of the editorial board of British Journal of Sport Medicine, Hide from the International Journal of Behavior Nutrition and Physical Activity, and Loretta Di Pietro from the Journal of Physical Activity and Health. So there were some specific papers published in different parts of this huge review of evidence. But the main one, the main article is this one, was published in British Journal of Sport Medicine, and it's really getting a lot of attention over 3 years, and basically summarized the process, it summarized the conclusion of the review process. In addition to this article, it's a scientific article in a short format. You can find in the WHO guidelines, you can find at least 3 different types of documents. One is the main document of the guidelines. That's about 120 pages, but very, like with infographics, are very easy to access and read it. Then there is at a glance document. It's about 20 pages. And then is the web annex that has all the evidence profile, these 500 pages. That is very ugly file, but there you have all the studies that have been reviewed. So 3 different type of formats. But you might be saying, can you please, Fran, go ahead and tell us what was the outcome of all this stuff? So the outcome of all this stuff was something so presented so simple like this. Basically, in a couple of pages, it can be summarized that I took the example of the adult group from 18-year-old to 64. So basically, you have a paragraph saying that people should do a certain amount of aerobic physical activity. Is given a range of 150 to 300 because in this range is shown to obtain most of the benefits in most of the people. But there was a dose-response effect for a lot of outcomes, so there is evidence enough to say that if you do more of this 150, 300 moderate vigorous physical activity, you will obtain additional benefits. And that's about aerobic physical activity, but there is also evidence that resistance training, a couple of days a week at least, it will provide additional benefits in adults. So a combination of aerobic and resistance training across the week, it will provide probably the best outcomes. So this is the guidelines, this is what you should do. But if we look at this little paragraph here in the beginning, and here there is recommendation about replacing sedentary activity for light intensity physical activity, sedentary behavior, for light intensity physical activity, and also the evidence behind that. If we will look at the beginning of every page, then we find a little paragraph. So that is the summary of all the work I said before. I said, that's all? That's all. The idea is to communicate to the broad public, to ministries, to people who really are stakeholders, who can change policies in a simple way. But if somebody wants more evidence, then you have these 500 pages of evidence as an attachment. But here, what does it say? That if you do this amount of physical activity that it was said there, aerobic, 150 to 300, moderate, or half of this time on vigorous physical activity, and some resistance training. So this regular physical activity associated with improved or reduction in all-cause mortality, cardiovascular mortality, incident hypertension, incident certain specific types of cancer, especially colon and breast cancer, type 2 diabetes, mental health, especially anxiety and depression, cognitive health, sleep, and some measure of adiposity can be reduced as well. So this is a lot of outcomes in a certain age group that can be improved. So there is a lot more evidence now than 10 years before in the field of exercise and health science. And this is for adults, but if we look at older adults, then we see some similar associations, because in the end it makes sense. It's a continuation. So if you improve in adulthood, you're also improving in older age. But in addition, there is some evidence about preventing falls and falls-related injuries if the people meet these guidelines. and also declines in bone health and functional ability. If we look also at the specific group of population that they are very prevalent and they live with chronic condition, the reason why this was done is because nowadays, if you look people over 50s, 60s, it's not weird or exceptional or a small group of population to have something. It's kind of common that almost everybody has something starting from some age. So this group of people need to be studied because they are part of the society, a big part of the society when you sum up the different diseases. So it was focused on some major, highly prevalent, like cancer survivors, people who live with this chronic condition, people who live with hypertension, with type 2 diabetes, or with HIV, as I say before, what is prevalent in Africans and other parts. So for each of them, it was done the review, and here is summarized the conclusion. For instance, this was completely new in these guidelines. That hasn't been done before. And actually was a lot of stereotypes and wrong myths and conceptions. So people thought that people with this disease actually should not do exercise for many years, and they thought that they actually can negatively affect the progression of the disease, the viral disease. But here the conclusion is that physical activity can improve fitness, can improve mental health in these people, and does not adversely affect the disease progression with some viral load counts, and it can improve also body composition. So there is nothing negative about these people doing physical activity. On the contrary, we will improve their well-being and the quality of life if we do it. So basically, this kind of evidence, if you want to go more into detail any of these specific target groups, then you can go and see really what are the evidence, what are the details. There is a lot of limits, also limitation in the evidence, so much more research still is needed. But we know already a lot of things that improve with physical activity or exercise. Also, people living with disabilities. There are certain conditions that it make you disabled in your daily living. For instance, multiple sclerosis, or people with a spinal cord injury, or people with diseases that affect cognition, and there's many of them. It can be a stroke, it can be schizophrenia, it can be intellectual disability, or even major clinical depression. It can really make people disabled. So in each of these groups also was reviewed the evidence on how physical activity can improve certain health outcomes in those people. So the message really of this guideline is physical activity is for all, for everybody, everywhere. And before we didn't have evidence for many of these specific groups, but now it's more and more evidence accumulated over the years. So we know and we are confident that making physical activity can have benefits. And somebody will ask, but what about the risks of physical activity? They might also have risk, and it does. So this review also included, as an outcome, adverse events. So it was a specific review to balance the benefits with the risks, because that's finally one of the key criteria to make a recommendation or not, that the benefits clearly overweight the risks. And it was absolutely no doubt. It was the risk. They might occur, but definitely there's so much more risk if you're sitting the couch all day around over your whole life. It's overwhelming evidence supporting that. So there is also evidence about pregnant women and postpartum women, how the physical activity during this critical period of life can help the moms and the fetus, both. So some of the outcomes reported in the summary is that it can improve, can decrease the risk of preeclampsia during the pregnancy, gestational hypertension, gestational diabetes, gestational excessive weight gain. It's fine to gain some weight, but if it is too much, that influence negatively to the mom and the fetus. Delivery complication is reduced in people who do physical activity during pregnancy. And let's go back to these evolutionary principles we say at the beginning of the lecture. You can well imagine that women during pregnancy could not be just standing there and say, hey, help me. They were active all through the pregnancy, as everybody else, as all the people are. Because some people say, yeah, in this hunter-gatherer society, there was no issue with disease because they just died when they were 30 years old. But that's a misconception. It's not true. There is evidence that they were living over 70 years. It is true that life expectancy has been increased over the last decades. It is true, but already these people were living quite long, and they were living good until almost the end. So the time of living without disability it has been increased. People live with issues and health issues for very long, but before this was very short, basically. You were living healthy until one point, and then it was something, and then you would die earlier. But the true thing is that we're older people, and these old people in this society were, and they're still in this modern society, very active. And so it is pregnant women. So there was also no adverse effect on the birth weight or the fetal mortality when the fetus is born dead. And so it's shown to do physical activity during the exercise has no way going to increase the risk of these cases, because that was some of the misconception and of the fears that were before with the of course, every of this population has a section with special considerations. So there's a lot of special consideration when you're doing physical activity during pregnancy, so you need to read all these things. But the evidence is what we are summarizing here today. Okay, so I'm finishing with one of the last group study is children and adolescents, started with adults. So children and adolescents should do around 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per day, and aerobically, and they should also do activities that strengthen the bones, strengthen the muscles, and some activities of vigorous physical activity about 3 times per week. And that will also have an effect, and here is the evidence-based paragraph that says that improve physical fitness, especially cardiorespiratory fitness, muscular fitness. If you do activity, improve your cardiometabolic health, especially blood pressure, dyslipidemia, glucose, insulin resistance, improve bone health, improve cognitive outcomes, academic performance, executive function, improve mental health, especially reduce depression symptoms, and reduce adiposity. So there is, again, also in this early ages of life, strong support for that. So, as we say, there was mostly about physical activity and health outcome, but it was also in parallel review everything about sedentary time, because we know that physical activity and sedentary time, they are 2 different things, right? So we can be, like many of us, probably spending many hours per day in front of a computer, so being highly sedentary because of our profession, but can be also training for a marathon, let's say, as an example. So can be highly sedentary and highly active at the same time. So if you review the evidence on sedentary behavior, there is also some evidence. It's much less than for physical activity, but it is more and more evidence accumulated that there's an independent predictor of better health. So for instance, this is for adults and older adults, and you can see that adults, including cancer survivors, people living with hypertension, type 2 diabetes, HIV, higher amount of sedentary behavior associated with poor health outcome, with more all-cause mortality, more cardiovascular mortality, more cancer mortality, more incident cardiovascular diseases, cancer, and incident of type 2 diabetes. So, yeah, so ideally we should try to increase physical activity and reduce sedentary time, replacing by light intensity physical activity. That was another new thing, kind of these guidelines, is that before it was the focus all on moderate vigorous physical activity, and thought that doing light intensity physical activity was not really proof that improved health a lot, but it was actually a method issue, in my opinion. Self-report is really difficult to self-report all the light intensity physical activity accumulated around the day, but you might remember when you did a moderate and high intensity. So you report only what you remember and what the questionnaire were based for. But nowadays with the devices, with the accelerometers, and we actually can measure everything, how much minutes at different intensity you accumulate. And now the new evidence has come that light intensity physical activity is also important, and is also related with a reduction in all this disease. So there is a huge amount of evidence showing the importance of physical activity, exercise to improve health. I will try to go into childhood obesity as a last part of the presentation. And so one of the big initiatives in Europe about childhood obesity is called COSI. So this is based on representative samples in different countries using measure weight and height, not self-report as other surveys, and using the same protocols. So it's a good thing that they started here in 2007 with a few countries, and you can see that has increased, and there's more than 40 countries in Europe nowadays having these representative samples on a specific age range that is 7 to 9 years old, so it's young children. But it was targeted just one group because of feasibility reason. But the idea is that this serves as a thermometer of how is the prevalence across Europe and how it's trending, how it's changing over the years. So what are the data? This is the latest report published in November. Now there is ongoing the data collection for the 6th wave. And you can see that the average is about almost 30% of these young children has overweight or obesity. Is the average in Europe. And you can see, you can be kind of happy that Finland is in the middle. So it's not among the worst or the best, let's say, or the one with less obesity. But it's not among the worst that I'm afraid I'm here as a representative of Spain. And we are here in the podium. You can clearly see that there is a south-north gradient in overweight obesity, having Cyprus, Greece, Spain, Italy, there in the top of overweight obesity, and it's about 10% more than here. But don't be too happy, because things might change everywhere, and I've seen data with collaborators in this room on preschoolers in Finland, and when you use the same method, not the specific reference values of Finland, because then it's not comparable with the rest of the world, but if you use the International Obesity Task Force or the WHO cut points to define overweight obesity, and compare this representative sample of preschoolers with Spain, we only observed 2% difference. So it was depending which cut point is about 10% difference, but is about 18-19% in Finland and about 21% in Spain using the International Obesity Task Force, and 10% more, so we are talking about 30% overweight obesity in preschool children in Finland if you use the WHO reference values. That's data from generated in this investigators in this university. So yeah, it is good, but still, even in a country like this, there are almost 1 out of 3 children might already start to have overweight obesity. So it is a very prevalent issue, but of course it's not the same everywhere. Cause is European, but this is, I think, the best study done so far. It was a Lancet initiative with WHO and some Imperial College of London and some others. So you can see here the increase over the last 4 decades. So before we were talking about millions of years, thousands of years, living on the same way. And now in 4 decades, look at the change. It has, the percentage of overweight obesity in children has been multiplied by 10, and in adults by 3 so far. And you can see the countries, especially in Asia, you see how it's increasing all over the time, and still in the last years it continues increasing. But this is more European or Western European, Central European, so it's kind of plateau, but it's still at a higher level. This is only obesity, not overweight obesity. But some part of English speaking, like include USA or UK, is also having a higher prevalences. So yeah, there are some developing countries with facing much worse issue on overweight obesity than it is here in Europe. So if we had this obesity that is so prevalent, it's not a few people, it's almost 1 every 3 child has overweight obesity. We should try to help them. And obesity is related with poorer physical health, with poorer mental health, and even recent reports show also with poor cognitive and academic performance. Can exercise help these children with overweight obesity? There are across the globe a lot of cases. So that was the main research question of the Active Brain trial, and this we've been working, has been on one of the main projects that has been leading in Spain over the last 10 years. And we have done a lot of cross-sectional study, but the good stuff, the intervention effect has just come. One last summer, and another important article came this summer. So these are 2 of the main effects of the intervention. There was the one on the primary outcome was brain health that included cognition, academic performance, and brain measure by MRI. And then this second paper that was published just this summer, also in the same journal, JAMA Network Open, it was about effects of intervention in overweight obese children in cardiometabolic health, let's say physical health, and also mental health. Depression, anxiety, self-esteem, optimism, happiness, like a lot of outcomes on that. So let's go first for this. It's an intervention, 5-month intervention, pre and post intervention, and a follow-up. So far, we only managed to analyze the first part. We haven't yet got to the third follow-up. 20 weeks, 5 months, 3 to 5 sessions per week. We try to combine aerobic exercise with resistance training following the guidelines. It's exercise based on games and in group activities or something similar to what can be done in physical education classes. And we try to increase by games and motivation the intensity as much as possible during the session. So we know that these children actually did train quite hard. They did train around 70% of the max heart rate for a bit more than an hour. And they spend about 40% of this time over 80% on the max heart rate. So it has been an important stimulus while having fun. So let's see what are the effects in cognitive brain. I will go quickly. So we measure a number of dimensions in cognition, academic performance, some computerized cognitive tests, and some MRI. Not going to go into the methods. What are the main effects? So we have like a priori outcomes of interest, and then a posteriori with exploratory analysis to try to explain the effects. So intelligence was one of the primary outcomes: executive function, academic performance, hippocampal volume. And I want to say that intelligence is not typically has been an outcome of a study because it was thought kind of that it's more stable, that less modifiable than other cognition outcomes. You're kind of born intelligent, you die intelligence, but it's not so easy to change. But we did include it, and we found some interesting findings. Actually, the largest effects were observed in intelligence, in total intelligence, but particularly in crystallized intelligence. And you can see here, this is expressed in standardized, means the 0.2 standard deviation improvement in the exercise group compared to a control group. It means a small effect size. 0.5 is a medium, and 0.8 is a large effect size. So you can see that this 0.7 is actually quite a large, more improvement in the exercise group than in the control group, quite a large effect on intelligence. And also we observed an effect on executive functions, particularly in cognitive flexibility, not so much in the other dimensions. And we saw an effect on total academic performance, but of a smaller magnitude. Unfortunately, we didn't see any effect on a structural brain level, not hippocampal volume, as you will see not in others. The results were very robust. So they were remaining significant after adjustment for multiple comparison. They were remaining significant in per protocol and intention to treat models. So the effects were there. And the effects on academic performance, it was a smaller magnitude, but consistent with the existing literature. No effects in working memory, no effect in inhibition, unfortunately, and no effect on hippocampal volume, gray matter. So that was the main effects, but then we tried to explain what has changed in the brain that could explain these effects in cognitive performance. And then we spent 2 years doing neuroimaging analysis. It took us forever. And the conclusion is we did a lot of analysis, selected regions, like broad brain analysis, and the summary is that we didn't find any effect. So we didn't find effect, especially on a structural level. And right now we are working on functional MRI level that maybe is easier, or hopefully there is more chances to modify functionally than structurally in a relatively short time intervention. So what about physical health? We got this paper, as I say, this summer, and here you have the main effects on physical outcomes. We have some cardiometabolic risk score that combine different individual risk factors, like lipid, glucose, blood pressure, waist circumference, all together. And you can see that this is also standardized changes. Exercise group in orange. You can see that the exercise group reduced the cardiometabolic risk score, while the control group increased the cardiometabolic. So the difference was significant, and the effect size was medium. And mainly was LDL cholesterol. The bad cholesterol was more reduced in the exercise group than the control group. But also the other major changes were in fat mass index, where there was a significant reduction in the exercise group versus the control group, and the visceral adipose tissue that was also more reduced in the exercise group than in the control group. Cardiorespiratory fitness, a powerful macro health and survival, it also was improved by the intervention. So we did have a number of effects, and this is just showing not the group means, the mean change in the groups, but the individual response. And this is really nice news, I think. when you have in the exercise group almost 80% of the children reduced fat mass index measured by an accurate measure in DEXA. They reduce significantly and meaningful, we say meaningful over 0.2 standard deviation. That is the minimum effect size, let's say, to consider meaningful. So 80% reduce more than 0.2 standard deviation more in the exercise group than in the control group, compared to only around 38% that also happen in the control group. So it's a large percentage of the intervention group that we managed to do an improvement in adiposity. And this is a figure, it just says that if you consider about the people that have a high risk of metabolic risk, how many can we change transition from the high risk group to the no risk group? So 70% of this sample in the exercise group changed to a better metabolic profile, and only 6% in the control group. It's a way of analyzing transition from a bad risk group to a better lower risk group. And the same for cardiorespiratory fitness. About 20% of those considered unfit at baseline were changed group in the exercise group, but only about 5% in the control group. So we do have evidence that we can help children with overweight obesity. Yep, thank you. So mental health, short story. We didn't see any single significant effect. That was very disappointing, because we really thought that children with overweight obesity might do have more mental issues, and they might be sensitive to improvements, but not. And actually, when discussing why this could be and looking at baseline level, it could be that it was a floor effect, because even if they have overweight obesity, they were young children. They were 8 to 11 years old. And when it comes to adolescents, it increased a lot the number of people with depression, with anxiety, and with mental disorders. And this was actually quite a mentally healthy population, even if they were overweight obesity at this phase. So it could be that you only have some margin for improvement when you are worse, and that occurs more in later ages in life. Or we don't know, but no effect. So we pass to the final messages, and I will try to be short. I think we all agree that there is a huge amount of evidence nowadays, much more than 10 years ago, supporting the benefits of physical activity and exercise to improve health. We saw the guidelines report. Obesity is very prevalent and very early in life, and if we want to make a change, we need to target it early in life, and we mean early, not only childhood, but even preschool, because we see already even some severe morbid obesity at preschool ages. So this has a very bad prognosis for the rest of the life. We saw in this trial, but also I put it just an example of our own research that we've been doing, but there are other studies supporting these ideas, that you can really improve cardiorespiratory fitness, body composition, cardiometabolic risk, brain health outcomes, and cognitive outcomes in children with overweight obesity by exercising. And this is a kind of final message also. This is the infographic from WHO. Every move counts. It's very important. As I say, not only moderate vigorous physical activity, every single thing helps to improve the health of people. And the doses are different or characteristic in different populations. The more, the better. And this is really the latest thing. It just got published yesterday night. So it's right now in the press release in the UK and Netherlands and Spain and some places. So it was published in a high-profile journal of cardiology, the Journal of American Cardiology. And it's about, okay, we know that the people should do about 150 to 300 minutes of moderate vigorous physical activity, but how do they know exactly what is that? Now we have a great potential in the wearables. We have the phones that measure steps. We have the smartwatches, smartbands that measure steps. And we can know how many steps they do. So now there have been accumulated more than 10 big cohort studies showing really that there is a dose-response effect for all-cause mortality. The more steps you accumulate per day, the lower is your all-cause mortality, and the lower is your cardiovascular mortality. And this study kind of gave some advances in showing the optimal dose, the minimal dose, and also that the cadence matter. Walking faster, it was an independent predictor of all-cause mortality. So how many steps? Add just 510,000 steps to your life. That should be the goal, because it's a dose-response benefit. But there is a range of about 7,000 to 9,000 steps that could be kind of public health guidelines, and every step counts. We'll finish this 1 minute. This is a WHO video summarizing the guidelines in 1 minute. Thanks to my group in Granada. We started 10 years ago. It's a very large group nowadays. And thanks also to the University of Jyväskylän Faculty of Sports Science to have me as a visiting professor, that we are doing a lot of nice new projects with people in this room today. And hopefully a lot of new evidence study will come out of that. Kiitos, 50 minutes.
Thank you very much, Professor Ortega. These nice little devices, how much they have influence on our lives nowadays, for good and not always so good. But yes, so we have 7-8 minutes time for questions. So please, do we have the microphone? Yes. Arto, there. Could you run the microphone? Did you see?
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Ortega. It was very nice overview about the topic.
Oh, that Arto. I was looking at the other Arto.
Arto, may I start?
Okay.
Sure.
Next question. Yes.
Arto, yes. Both Artos can ask questions.
Okay. Only Artos are here. Okay. I'm really happy that you showed those individual training responses curves. I mean the individual bars. Was it related to cardiorespiratory fitness or body weight outcome? I don't recall it.
Yeah, we did a correlation association between changes in adiposity and changes in cardiometabolic health.
80% was high responders, 80%, 79%.
Right.
But what was the outcome?
The outcome was fat mass index.
Fat mass, okay.
Fat mass index. So it's
Okay.
the amount of fat relative to the height square.
Exactly.
It's not expressed as a percentage of body weight. Yeah.
Yes. My question is that if you think about the determinants for this phenomena, can you see, for example, that the baseline level explains this? And if so, how much? And are there some other determinants who could describe over here?
Yep. Very good question. Actually, baseline is the main determinant of changes, but we include it as an adjustment in our models. So all intervention efforts are adjusted by baseline so that the groups have the same baseline level at the beginning. But yes, in general, if we look at the literature, some school-based intervention that they intervene in the whole class, so some people are normal weight, some people are overweight. So often the changes in adiposity or BMI, they're not that big, but that's because there are people normal weight there. So the higher is the baseline level of adiposity, the more room for improvements with exercise in adiposity. So baseline influence a lot on the outcome. So this population had overweight, obesity, and even 1/3 of the population have severe morbid obesity. So it was people with a lot of adiposity, and probably that's why they saw a big reduction in adiposity that you will not see if you intervene in a population where people are mostly normal weight. Yeah.
Yes. And if I continue a bit, do you recall that how much was the the value of this determination for the baseline? So how much this explains about the results related if you are going to be a high responder or low responder?
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't think we did that analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think we did that one.
Okay, thank you. Now we give the floor to the other Arto.
I'm very happy to be mistaken with my dear colleague Arto. Thank you for the very nice presentation, and also it was very good to hear of the process of developing the guidelines, and it made me thinking, what would be your comment on, because we have all the time more and more device-measured data on our daily behaviors. It seems to emphasize a little bit more these light activities during daily life, which are pretty difficult to recall, as you mentioned. So what do you think, how this will be reflected in the future guidelines? How will it change the messaging to people? Will it become more difficult to say people what they should be doing, because it's all that fine-grained activities that might be meanuful?
Yeah. Thank you, Arto. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think already in these 2020 guidelines, it has been a number of changes due to the devices. So one of the changes is that in the old guidelines of WHO 2010, it was, you might remember the idea that you need to do the physical activity in blocks at least of 10 minutes to be helpful for health. And this has been deleted for the new outcomes because of the continued and more accurate and objective measurement of accelerometers has shown that if you accumulate activity across the week, every move counts. And it counts, you don't need to accumulate the activity in blocks of 10 minutes as it was thought before. So that's one of the change, thanks to accelerometer, that has changed the guidelines. The other was the concept of the logo of the guidelines. Every move count is actually reflecting that. Because we do have observational cohort data strongly showing that every move count, there is a dose response, so it means that there is benefits well before the 150 minutes. So if you are very little active, you will get benefits well before the 150 minutes, and also at light intensity physical activity that was not measured before. But that's observational data. Complexity is that the guideline kind of integrate evidence from cohort observational data and with RCTs, with intervention studies. So intervention studies focus on exercise. Often they have still done activity of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So when we look at the evidence for intervention study, still is a lot on moderate vigorous, and that's why still part of the evidence are heavily based on that. But the observational cohort studies, yeah, really showing that every move count, basically. So I think that was another of the changes. And another, the last one probably I remember, is when it comes to this reducing sedentary time. If you change sedentary time, you have to do something else. So it was said that replacing, the concept of replacing came for first time into the guidelines. Replacing sedentary time for activity of any intensity, including light. And that is because of the isotemporal models, compositional data analysis coming from accelerometers that are related with mortality and stroke outcomes. So I think it already has been reflecting a lot, but I think probably it will be even more, because in the end, intervention study is the gold standard evidence, cause effects, but it still always measure a very little window of our lifetime. 1 year, maximum 2 years, very few go, so it's a low. So in the end, prospective cohort studies are needed and will be needed to be combined with the evidence coming from RCTs, I think. Yeah. Thank you.
Any more Artos? No, Riku, please.
Thank you, Riku Nikander, physiotherapy and Faculty of Sport here in Jyväskylä. I was surprised when you showed that the children 7 to 9 years old were more obese in Spain than in Finland. And because I guess we all know that the nutrition is really important and physical activity supports the nutrition very well. But my idea is, or what I know is that that people in Spain and Greece and southern parts of Europe, they eat quite well, the healthy food. So I was surprised that the children are so obese. So what has changed?
Yep. Very good question. Actually, we have considered obesity obviously from a bidimensional perspective, at least the intake or nutrition and the expenditure. So there is evidence showing that they are less active in those southern countries than in northern countries. And there is data, of course, on self-report, but also this study I presented that has pooled accelerometer data across Europe, it was confirming the south-north gradient in physical activity. So you guys here, your children are way more active than they are in south of Europe. And that's objectively measured, and it's also in self-report and in all the ways. So that is very important. And when it comes to nutrition, it's true that the Mediterranean diet and this thing has been there, but it has changed a lot. So my grandparents and my mom and my father, they used to have really Mediterranean diet, but it's changing a lot nowadays. I think it's more similar everywhere. And I think if I see what you guys eat here, I don't think that we eat better in South when we go to the canteen of the university, for instance. It's probably similar. But also, it's true that even Mediterranean diet has never been a thin diet. It has been provide cardiometabolic benefits, but not necessarily have been thinner, the people. So the intervention on Mediterranean diets has shown improvement in cardiometabolic profile without improvements in body composition. So it could be that people in southern countries, they have more overweight obesity, but not necessarily a higher future cardiovascular risk. In fact, longevity in Spain is among the longest in the world and some other southern countries. But again, the people who are living long now were the grandparents. We don't know when the new children will be grandparents, how the data would be on mortality. But this is a very, very interesting question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. It looks like we are now approaching the end of the seminar session. Thank you very much. Once again, applause to Professor Ortega. And before I let you go for coffee, just a quick question. How many of you know what is the #1 reason for Europeans not to exercise? Just shout. Lack of time. So that's the thing. So now I suppose the takeaway home exercise for everyone is to think about how can we develop our time consumption so that there would be enough steps for us. Right. Okay, thank you.